Welcome back. Today we have a spooky episode of SmoothBrainEDH, bringing the smoothest plays with the biggest brains. Today we have some Halloween-themed commander action, so let's get right into it. First up, Matt on Be'lakor the Dark Master, a Grixis Demons deck. His opener has Forbidden Orchard, Path of Ancestry, City of Brass, Morphic Pool, Razaketh the Foul-Blooded, Blasphemous Act, and Sneak Attack. Second is Logan on Lynde, Cheerful Tormentor, Curses. His opening hand includes Sulphur Falls, Bloodstained Mire, Luxury Suite, Commander Sphere, Skull of Orm, Talisman of Dominance, and Toxic Deluge. Third is Chandler on Ever-Changing Dane Reanimator, with a hand of Flooded Strand, Castle Loch Thwain, Swamp, Island, Luminous Broodmoth, Soul Ring, and Smothering Tithe. Last up is Cody on Millicent, Restless Revenant, Ghostly Spirit Tribal, with Hallowed Fountain, Island, Glacial Fortress, Temple of the False God, Reflections of Lidyara, Heuristic Study, and Arcane Denial. He's ready to rock. But before we hop into the gameplay, please let us know in the comments who your favorite spooky season commander is and why they're special to you. While you're there, why don't you check the description for deck lists, link to our Discord, Patreon, podcast, social media, as well as affiliate links for both Dragon Shield and Ain't Gaming. But in any case, let's get to the gameplay.
It looks like Chandler wins the die roll, and of course the person with a turn 1 Soul Ring is the one to go first. After he casts it, he passes the turn to Cody, who plays Hallowed Fountain tapped and passes it to Matt, who will play Forbidden Orchard and pass to Logan. Logan will play and fetch with a Bloodstained Mire, going to find a Canyon Slough, and he passes while searching. And you saw the opening hands, you know what's going to happen. Chandler plays Plains, taps for 4, and casts Smothering Tithe. The turn is then passed to Cody, who can't pay for Smothering Tithe in his draw step, and then he'll play a Glacial Fortress as land for turn, and then tap for 2 to cast Felwar Stone. He'll then attempt to pass the turn, but Matt stops on end step to tap his Forbidden Orchard, and he gives Cody a Spirit. Then on his turn, he doesn't pay for Smothering Tithe, then plays Path of Ancestry, then passes to Logan. Logan also can't pay for Smothering Tithe, so he'll just play a Luxury Suite, then cast a Talisman of Dominance, and then pass to Chandler. Chandler will then play an island as land for turn, and then he taps for 3 to cast He Who Is Ever-Changing. He'll then tap his Soul Ring for 2 colorless mana, and with one of it, he'll cast Phyrexian Dreadnought. It has an ETB trigger, but in response to it, Chandler will use the floating colorless to sacrifice it to make Ever-Changing Dane a 12/12. And then he declines to sacrifice anything to the ETB trigger, and then he'll pass the turn to Cody. Cody will pay for Smothering Tithe in his draw step, and then he'll play a basic island as land for turn, and then he Darksteel Mutations Ever-Changing Dane. Cody will then pass to Matt, who gives him another Spirit on end step. Then, on his draw step, Matt will pay for Smothering Tithe, and when he taps his Orchard, he'll give Cody another Spirit. He'll then play Morphic Pool and pass to Logan, who doesn't pay for Smothering Tithe. Logan will, however, play a Polluted Delta, and then tap for 3 to cast Commander Sphere, and then pass the turn. Chandler will start his turn off with a Castle Loch Thwain, and then he casts his Luminous Broodmoth. After this, he'll tap for 5 to cast Incarnation Technique, demonstrating it targeting Logan. And so Logan will mill 5 cards, starting with Curse of Thirst, then Deflecting Swat, Deadly Rollick, Curse of Fool's Wisdom, and Crumbling Necropolis. Unfortunately, there are no creatures in his graveyard after this, so he can't return anything. So Chandler will start on his 2 copies, starting with Plains, Doom Whisperer, Consecrated Sphinx, Esper Sentinel, and Takenuma. An amazing first hit. And the creature he brings back with this copy is Doom Whisperer. Then, with the original copy of the spell on the stack, Chandler will pay 2 life to Surveil 2, putting Marsh Flats and Karmic Guide into his graveyard, and then he'll do it again. This time putting Evil Twin and Swords to Plowshares in the graveyard, and then he'll resolve his second copy of Incarnation Technique. This time he'll mill Arcane Signet, Otawara, Anguished Unmaking, Wayfarer's Bauble, and Orzhov Basilica. Thankfully, the returned creature doesn't have to be in those 5 cards, so he'll return Karmic Guide to the battlefield, and when it returns to the battlefield, he'll return Consecrated Sphinx. The turn is then passed to Cody, and when he draws a card, Chandler will draw 2, and he won't pay for Smothering Tithe. Cody will then play Temple of the False God, and then cast Heuristic Study, then passes to Matt. And when Matt draws a card, Chandler will draw 2, and he doesn't pay for Smothering Tithe. He'll then tap his Forbidden Orchard for red, and drop Blasphemous Act, and he gives Cody the 1/1 Spirit. There is a Heuristic Study trigger on the stack, but Cody responds to his own trigger by casting Swords to Plowshares on Consecrated Sphinx. Chandler responds by paying 2 life to Surveil 2. He'll keep the top card of his library and bin Strategic Planning. Swords to Plowshares will then resolve, exiling Consecrated Sphinx, and then Matt won't pay 1 to Heuristic Study, Cody will draw a card, Tithe isn't paid, and then Blasphemous Act resolves. Matt will then cast Dark Ritual, Study isn't paid, and Tithe isn't paid. And then with that 3 black mana in his pool, Matt will tap for 1 red and cast Sneak Attack. Study isn't paid, and Tithe isn't paid. He'll then attempt to pass the turn, but Logan will stop on end step to crack his fetch and find a fetid pool to the battlefield tapped. Then on his turn, he'll play a Graven Cairns. Oh yeah, and he doesn't pay for Tithe on his draw step. He'll then cast his Skull of Orm. He doesn't play for Study or Tithe. And then he casts Curse of the Restless Dead on Chandler, not paying for Study or Tithe again. And then he'll pass the turn to Chandler, who will start off by casting Raffine. Chandler doesn't pay for Study, and Cody doesn't pay for Tithe. Chandler then plays a Flooded Strand as land for turn, and Logan gets a 2/2 Decayed Zombie. He'll then move to combat and will swing his 0/1 Ever-Changing Dane at Cody, and it'll connive for 1. He draws a card and discards Drownyard Temple. After this, he will tap for 8 mana to cast Agadeem's Awakening. X is equal to 5. And he will pay for Rhystic Study. He'll return Esper Sentinel, Luminous Broodmoth, and Karmic Guide to the battlefield, and then when Karmic Guide enters, he'll return his Doom Whisperer again. And then he'll pass the turn to Cody, who doesn't pay for Smothering Tithe, and then he'll play and fetch with a Flooded Strand for a Tundra. He'll then cast his own Smothering Tithe, and he will pay the 1 to Esper Sentinel. He then drops Vanquish the Horde for only 2 mana. Chandler responds by paying 2 life to Surveil 2. He'll put Swamp and Body Launderer in the graveyard. He'll then do it again, this time binning Bajuka Bog and Swan Song, and then he'll repeat the process. And then this time he puts Malakir Rebirth into the graveyard and puts a card on top. The board wipe will then resolve, Luminous Broodmoth will trigger, and Esper Sentinel comes back with a flying counter. The turn is then passed to Matt, who doesn't pay for either Tithe. And then he'll play a City of Brass's land for turn. He'll then pay a red to sneak attack in Rakdos, Lord of Riots, and he'll give Cody the 1/1 Spirit. He'll then sneak attack again to put in Razaketh, taking 1 to his City of Brass. Also, I'd like to say I am so sorry for the glare. There was a skylight right above us and we didn't realize it was doing this. Continuing on though, Matt will move to combat and he swings Razaketh at Cody and Rakdos at Logan, and they both just take it. Then in his second main, Matt will sacrifice Rakdos to Razaketh to tutor a card. And you better believe the card he tutored was Dockside Extortionist, which he will sneak attack out. Chandler and Cody could sacrifice their treasure tokens in response, but they both decide that the difference between 11 and 18 isn't that much in this situation, especially with a sneak attack in play. And so Matt will start his turn off by casting Be'lakor. When it enters the battlefield, he'll draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. He will pay for Rhystic Study, but not either Smothering Tithe. He'll then cast a Molten Echoes, and he will pay the 1 for Cody, but not for Chandler's Esper Sentinel. And Chandler won't pay for Cody's Tithe. Jesus Christ, there are so many taxes in this game. Once all those triggers have resolved, Cody will cast Arcane Denial on the Molten Echoes. Chandler misses his Esper Sentinel trigger, and Matt will respond by sacrificing Dockside to Razaketh. He searches up and casts his own Arcane Denial, and he will pay the 1. So Cody's denial is denied, Molten Echoes resolves, naming Demon. And I'm just gonna let you guys know, we completely mess up with Molten Echoes, and whenever a demon with an ETB triggers, we'll trigger the second one, but forget to actually put the token out. We're called Smooth Brain for a reason. But, you know, stuff like this happens, what can you do? Matt will then pay a red to activate Sneak Attack, and Chandler responds by casting Path to Exile on Be'lakor. Rhystic Study isn't paid, and then Tithe isn't paid, and then with Path to Exile still on the stack, Matt will pay another red to Sneak Attack in Runescarred Demon. Molten Echoes will make a copy of it, so he gets to tutor 2 cards and deal 6 damage to 2 targets. And those 2 targets are Chandler and Cody's faces. Path to Exile will then resolve on Be'lakor, and Matt finds a tapped mountain, and then the original Sneak Attack activation resolves, and Matt puts in Sakashima of 1,000 Faces. He has it enter as a copy of Razaketh, and then he'll cast Reanimate on Dockside Extortionist, and he does pay 1 to Cody. The Reanimate resolves, and Cody and Chandler this time decide to sacrifice all of their treasures. And so this time he only gets 11 treasures. I may say only, but that is actually still a lot. He'll then pay 9 mana to recast Be'lakor, the extra 1 to pay for Rhystic Study. Molten Echoes will trigger again, and once again, we remember the ETB trigger but forget to put the token out, so he'll draw 4 cards and lose 4 life 2 times when it should have been like 6 or 7. And no Smothering Tithe triggers are paid, so Chandler and Cody will make 8 treasure tokens each. After this, Matt will sacrifice his Dockside Extortionist to Razaketh to search for a card, and then he'll move to his end step, and he has to sacrifice everything but Be'lakor. Then on cleanup, he'll discard 4 lands and a Soul Ring, and then the turn is Logan's. Thankfully, the Arcane Denial trigger on upkeep isn't missed, and no Smothering Tithe triggers are paid. Logan then won't pay for his triggers on his draw step, and then he'll play his Sulphur Falls as land for turn. After this, he drops Toxic Deluge, paying 5 life. He doesn't pay either 1, and Cody and Chandler don't pay their 2s. Matt, however, is not a fan of this, and he'll cast Swan Song on it. He'll pay for the 1 for Cody, but not for Chandler, and Chandler won't pay the 2. And so the Deluge is countered, and Logan has a 2/2 flyer. And so after this, he'll just cast Lynde and then pass the turn to Chandler. Chandler will fetch on instep for Raffine's Tower. And then he'll pay 3 mana to return Drownyard Temple to the battlefield, and Logan gets a zombie. Then on his turn, he'll tap for 2 and cast Persist, targeting Evil Twin. He doesn't pay the 1, and Cody doesn't pay the 2. It'll resolve, and then Evil Twin will enter the battlefield, and he'll have it become a copy of Be'lakor. And when it enters the battlefield, he'll draw a card and lose a life. He'll then cast Reanimate, targeting Matt's Runescarred Demon, and when the Runescarred Demon enters the battlefield, he'll have his Be'lakor deal 6 damage to Matt's Be'lakor, and then he'll search his library for a card. Matt will respond to the damage trigger by casting Malakir Rebirth on his Be'lakor, so when it dies, it enters the battlefield again. He doesn't pay 1 for either Chandler or Cody, and they don't pay 2 for each other. Continuing on, Chandler will then tap for 5 and cast Bribery. He doesn't pay the 1, and Cody doesn't pay the 2. He'll then search Matt's deck, and he finds a Lord Xander to the battlefield. There are 2 triggers when he ETBs. Be'lakor will deal damage to the other Be'lakor, killing it, and then he'll have Cody discard half his hand. Matt will respond by casting a Deadly Relic targeting Lord Xander while he still has his commander out. He doesn't pay the 1 to Cody, and Chandler misses a Smothering Tithe trigger. And so Xander is exiled, then Be'lakor dies, and then Cody will discard half of his hand. Chandler will then play a Polluted Delta, and then cast a Ledger Shredder. And he does pay the 1 this time. Logan also gets another zombie. He'll then cast a Talisman of Hierarchy, paying the 1 again, and then he'll pass the turn to Cody, who starts off by paying for Smothering Tithe. He'll then play a Sea of Clowns, and then tap it to cast an Esper Sentinel. He'll then tap for 4 to cast a Commander's Sphere, and he does pay 1 for Chandler, and there's also a Connive trigger, so Chandler draws a card and discards Godless Shrine. And he doesn't pay for Smothering Tithe. Cody will then float a white with his Commander's Sphere and then sacrifice it to draw a card, and he does pay the 2. And then he drops a Windborn Muse. He'll then cast Sword of the Animus and equip it to his Spirit. After this, he casts Supreme Phantom, and then he'll move to combat and swing for 3 at Matt. Sword of the Animus will trigger, and he searches for a basic land to the battlefield tapped. He'll then just pass the turn. And tithes aren't paid. Matt will then play an Exotic Orchard, and then he'll cast a Whip of Erebos. But he gets the Spirit. Both Esper Sentinel triggers are missed, Rhystic Study isn't paid for, and then Smothering Tithe isn't paid for. Matt will then sneak attack in a Villas, Broker of Blood. He'll then swing the Villas, which now has lifelink at Logan, and Logan will jump it with his 2/2. Matt will then tap his City of Brass to deal a damage to him. He'll float a black, and this will draw him a card. And the ties aren't paid for. He then uses that black to activate Villas to kill Chandler's Esper Sentinel, losing 2 life and drawing 2 cards, and of course, more treasures for the Tithe people. Matt will then pass the turn, and Villas will go away. Chandler will stop on end step to fetch with his Polluted Delta for a Scrublands, and Logan gets another zombie. Now on Logan's turn, he'll play a Tainted Isle as land for turn, and then he'll tap his Commander's Sphere for red and sacrifice it to draw a card. No Tithe tax is paid. He'll then cast a Chromatic Lantern, not paying the 1 Heuristic Study, and Cody forgets about Esper Sentinel. And Cody doesn't pay for Smothering Tithe. Logan then overloads a Vandal Blast, paying the 1, and then Chandler will respond by casting a Consider, not paying the 1. Cody doesn't pay the 2, so that makes this a free Consider. Chandler keeps the card on top, draws the card, and then doesn't pay 2 to Cody. Then, also in response, Cody will flash in a Nebelgast, tapping down Runescarred Demon. Then he flashes in Rattle Chains to give Supreme Phantom hexproof. Chandler remembers to connive, discarding a Scalding Tarn, even though he forgot to do it with Logan. And then he'll cast a Patrician Geist, and then finally, his commander, Millicent. The Vandal Blast then resolves, and then Logan will swing 8 at Matt with his Decayed Zombies, and then at the end of combat, they go away. But we remember that here in a little bit. And then the turn is passed to Chandler, who starts off with a Gaia Reach Sanitarium. Cody remembers Smothering Tithe on draw step, and Chandler doesn't pay. And then Cody offers to not full swing at him next turn if Chandler lets him draw some cards with Rhystic Study. And Chandler agrees. He'll then cast a pair of Lightning Greaves, not paying the 1, and Cody doesn't pay the 2. He then casts a Solemn Simulacrum, not paying the 1 and forgetting about Smothering Tithe. Sad Sam finds a tapped island, and Logan gets another zombie. Chandler will then swing for 6 in the air at Logan, and then he'll pass the turn to Cody. Smothering Tithe isn't paid on draw step, and then Cody will cast a Soul Ring. He'll then cast a Distant Melodies, choosing Spirit. Ledger Shredder connives, and Chandler discards Mimic Vat, and he doesn't pay the 2. It resolves, and he'll draw 8 cards, and Chandler gets 8 treasures. Cody will then move to combat, and he swings for exactly 13 at Matt. He'll swing 2 3/3s at Chandler, and then everything else at Logan. Chandler's able to block with his Ledger Shredder and have them bounce, and then he'll block the other 3/3 with Be'lakor, killing it. Matt will unfortunately die here, and Logan will take 10. And then Millicent triggers 6 times, making 6 spirits. And then after this, Cody will pass the turn to Logan, who will play a Swamp, and then will tap for 4 to cast Hagra Mauling, targeting Millicent, and he won't pay the 1, and Cody doesn't pay the 2, and then Millicent dies. And then Cody also gets another 1/1. Logan will then move to his end step, and Cody asks Chandler, "You gonna win next turn?" jokingly, and Chandler responds, "I'm gonna try," which provokes Cody into tapping for 7 and overloading a Cyclonic Rift. Logan will respond by activating his skull to get Curse of Fool's Knowledge back to his hand, and Chandler will crack all of his treasures to float Esper 4 times. And then the Cyclonic Rift resolves. And then staying on end step, Chandler flashes in a Notion Thief, and he does pay the 1. Then on Chandler's turn, Cody misses a Smothering Tithe trigger, and then Chandler will play an Iganjo, and then cast Massacre Worm, not paying the 1, but Cody declines the draw. This doesn't do anything to Cody's board, but then Chandler overloads Dam. Also not paying the 1, but Cody declines the draw. Cody has exactly 13 creatures, so he'll lose 26 life from Massacre Worm. So this will kill him, and then Chandler will pass the turn to Logan. And Logan will start by casting Talisman of Dominance. And then he casts Curse of Fool's Wisdom on Chandler. He'll then pass the turn to Chandler, and there's a trigger on his draw step. And then Chandler will play a Plains as land for turn. He'll then recast He Who Is Ever Changing, and then he'll recast Lightning Greaves, and equip He Who Is Ever Changing with the Lightning Greaves. He'll then cast a Grim Haruspex, and then attack Logan for 3. And Logan just has to take the damage. The turn is then passed to Logan, who will start off by recasting his Chromatic Lantern. He then recasts his Skull, and then his Curse of the Relentless dead on Chandler, and then he'll pass the turn to Chandler, who loses 2, and Logan gains 2 on his draw step. Chandler will then cast Junji the Midnight Sky, and then sacrifice him to Ever-Changing Dane to make Ever-Changing Dane a copy of him. Chandler chooses to reanimate Phyrexian Dreadnought. Grim Haruspex will also trigger, and so will Logan's Curse. When the Dreadnought enters the battlefield, Chandler will do the same trick he did at the beginning of the game by sacrificing it to Dane. There will be a Grim Haruspex trigger and a Curse trigger, but Logan knows that Chandler just needs to cast his Ledger Shredder from hand and equip it with the Lightning Greaves to be able to deal lethal to him. So, Logan will concede the game. There you have it. Chandler and the Ever-Changing Dane is the winner of the Halloween 2022 special. Well everyone, there you have it. That was a really fun game if you ask me, even though there were some mistakes. But most of the time, there's no such thing as a perfect game of Magic. Let us know what you thought down in the comments below, and don't forget to check out all of our links in the description. By the way, if you entered our 40k video giveaway, today we are choosing the winners, so be sure to check your email. You have 48 hours to respond, or we're picking someone else. But that is all for now, you guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a happy Halloween, and have a smooth day.